Thank you, Nokia, for that kind introduction. And thank you for hosting me at your Digital Divide Summit. As you all know, I chair the Communications and Technology Subcommittee in the House and have been deeply involved in tech and telecommunications policy throughout my time in Congress. Coronavirus has changed so much about how we work, live, and learn, how we interact with our family and our friends, what it means to go to work in the morning, what it means to take your kids to school. For a lot of folks, it's changed the way we buy groceries and buy prescriptions, and generally how we go about our day and conduct our affairs. For many Americans, broadband connectivity is the essential lifeline, the glue as it were, that is holding things together. This virus has laid bare so many of the inequalities in our society that it has set the digital divide in sharp relief. At no point in our nation's history has digital connectivity been so important and closing the digital divide so necessary. Tens of millions of students at all academic levels, from kindergarten to PhDs, are learning virtually. But for far too many, the lack of affordable access means that they are falling further behind. For the millions of students that were already stuck in the homework gap, where before they may have lacked broadband access at home, so couldn't complete their online homework assignments, they're now faced with a true learning gap. We've all seen and heard stories of kids sitting outside fast food restaurants, libraries, or a spot on the side of the road where they could get decent service. As you all know, a part of this problem is the deployment of and access to consistent and reliable service. I think for the first time, Americans are really coming to terms with how fast their internet connection is, how reliable it is, how much data they are using, and for far too many people, how much their service costs, particularly when weighed against the cost of food, shelter, and other essentials. In so many ways, this crisis is worsening the digital divide and separating the digital haves from the digital have-nots. Since the beginning of this crisis, I have advocated for action to close these divides and ensure that all Americans have broadband access. Closing the homework gap and making broadband more affordable have been important parts of every COVID relief proposal put forth by the House Democrats, and a number of bipartisan proposals as well. Closing these gaps now is going to require billions of dollars in federal investment, and it is far past time for Congress to act. In March, 9 months ago now, when this crisis began in earnest and states began to take action to impose lockdowns, it was clear to me and many others that the federal government needed to take dramatic action to deal with the impacts of COVID-19. At one point, nearly 4 billion people, roughly half the world's population, were asked or ordered to stay at home. Realizing that we were in a crisis, Democrats began trying to work with the Trump FCC and our colleagues in the Senate to address the broadband component of this crisis. We urged our colleagues to consider the kinds of bold actions our government had taken in the past when it faced grave threats. For example, the Bush administration rapidly expanded and modernized the Lifeline program during Hurricane Katrina to meet the needs of people who were impacted by the storm. It was clear then that this crisis was not only a natural disaster, but a national and worldwide one as well. At that time, Democrats proposed $2 billion in funding for connected devices and internet service so that at-need students could learn remotely by expanding the FCC's E-rate program. We also proposed $1 billion in additional funding to expand broadband access for low-income Americans. In the HEROES 2 Act, we included $12 billion for remote learning and $3 billion for emergency connectivity for low-income and recently unemployed Americans, a recognition of how much this crisis has grown since then. Since the beginning, we recognized that this crisis was different and that expanding broadband access was an essential part of our nation's response. For Americans who lost their jobs, who have been furloughed, who have seen their unemployment benefits slashed or cut off, and whose stimulus checks were spent long ago, and with eviction moratoriums and prohibition on utility shutoffs expiring, Too many are struggling financially, and our government isn't providing the help that they need. So, as we look towards the end of the year package and potentially another much needed COVID response bill, it remains my sincere hope that we can come together to address these important priorities so that we can help students, families, and those hit hardest by this crisis. Broadband was also one of the centerpieces of H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act, the House Democrats' infrastructure proposal. I joined Jim Clyburn in introducing our plan to connect all Americans to affordable broadband internet. This $100 billion plan, which passed the House as part of H.R. 2, is the most significant proposal to close the digital divide and bring broadband to all in our nation's history. This plan has three overarching objectives. First, invest in deploying broadband infrastructure. Second, to ensure that Americans have access to affordable service. And third, driving broadband adoption and digital inclusion. We know that tens of millions of Americans lack access to broadband. Some estimates put the number at over 100 million. The bill sets aside $80 billion for the deployment of broadband. This investment is intended to drive the construction of fiber networks and fiber to homes throughout the country. These networks are faster, more resilient, and able to meet the challenges of tomorrow as technology changes. After years of hearings and hundreds of hours of testimony, one thing is clear, and that's that if we are going to deploy broadband across the country, the federal government needs to step up with a significant investment. For years, we have heard false promises that cutting regulations will fix the problem. It just isn't true, and it hasn't fixed the problem. We are long past time of needing to act, and this pandemic has clearly shown that. The second thrust of this proposal is to make broadband more affordable. Most Americans only have one or two choices at best for high-speed connectivity, and a lack of choice means a lack of competition. Our proposal would require providers who build networks using federal funds to offer an affordable option to folks. During COVID-19, we have seen a number of providers come forward with lower cost options than were available before the pandemic. This is an important step forward for them to realize that they need to do more to get folks online. But this patchwork of offerings, sometimes at speeds that don't even qualify as broadband, isn't enough, and we need a real national strategy for how to make these services affordable to all. And finally, the third leg of this proposal is focused on adoption and getting the people connected who really can't afford broadband at any price. Too many services, from the census to applying for unemployment, are done online today. Online services are often more efficient, and frankly, during COVID, they are safer than making people interact in person. Getting everyone connected isn't just about closing the digital divide. It's about making our society stronger and more resilient in the face of the challenges we face today and in the future. And to do that, we need to build the networks, ensure that everyone has access to fast, reliable service, and get everyone online. Next year, with a new president and a new administration, I hope to see a government that uses every tool in its toolbox to address this crisis. I look forward to an FCC that lives up to its mission to provide universal service to all Americans. And I hope to see a Congress that can come together and fund these pressing needs. Connectivity in the 21st century isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. I know that you all at Nokia are working to close the digital divide and build out next generation networks. This is important work, and I continue to look forward to working with you all as we address this critical challenge to our country. Thank you for inviting me to speak today.